Hey guys, Michael here. Check out this really awesome name I made here. You want to see how this is done? Stick around and I'll show you how I did it. Now, because of the size of this project, I had to use my xTool P2 and the conveyor option for it. This piece is 15 inches wide by almost 44 inches high. And that right there tells you it's too big for the bed of any laser that I have. So I had to use the conveyor feature. Now, of course, I had to make the wood a little bit wider, a little bit longer. If you want to learn how to use the conveyor and kind of how to set up everything, take a look at my previous video. I'll put a link to that video up here, and that will show you how to use a conveyor. I did all the same steps that I did here on this one, only I'm doing a cut on this piece instead of engraving or scoring. This is 1/4 inch birch plywood. I'm cutting this at 60% power, 7 millimeters per second. Once everything was cut out, now I have to prep the material for painting. So what that takes is sanding, sanding, and more sanding. I used a Dremel to get along the edges as much as I could, trying to be gentle and not move it around too much. I lifted it up a little bit with a couple of pieces of foam so that I'm not trying to bend it too much while sanding it so it stays fully supported. Once I finished sanding with the rotary tool, I then laid it on the flat surface and sanded it by hand. I used a couple of different sanding methods that I've used in the past, and these tools seem to work good for me. I'll put a link in the description down below so you can see exactly what I'm using for the small pieces when I'm sanding these pieces. Once I have everything sanded, now it's time to dust off everything, make sure there's no extra impurities on there, using a brush, using an air tool. I want to just blow everything off and just make sure there's no dust, no dirt, no debris on there. So now that everything's sanded down, it's time to lay down some primer on the wood before I actually put my final coat of paint on there. Now, what the primer does is keeps the wood even. That way it doesn't look for imperfections in the wood, because wood has grain in there. They'll have different color shadings and stuff like that along the wood. So what I did was I used some regular Rust-Oleum primer on there. I usually use filler primer. However, I don't know why, but I bought the wrong one. And this is just Rust-Oleum regular plain old primer, and it worked just fine. Filler primer, the advantage of that is it will actually fill in the gaps of the wood, the imperfections, kind of build that up. So you can sand it down so it's really smooth. However, in this case, this birch plywood is actually smooth enough where I didn't have to worry about that. Once I put that primer on, I did 2 coats, and I made sure it was completely dry, following the instructions on the primer, and then I sanded yet again. This time I used, I believe, a 320 grit, maybe 220 grit sandpaper, and smoothed it really smooth to the touch to make sure there's no bumps, because I'm going to use a metallic paint on there. I want to make sure there's no bumps on the wood, make sure there's no imperfections to get the best look possible for what the sign is with the birch plywood. So with the top coat I'm using a Rust-Oleum metallic paint. It looks like this. And what I did was I applied this in 3 coats. So I did a very light coat the first time, making sure to pay attention to the edges all the way around, then a layer on top. Let that dry for about 40-45 minutes. Went back, repeated that one more time, again 40-45 minutes, and one final time, making sure to get a nice even coat across the top, making sure not to get it too thick, but also making sure to I'm get all the gray areas, and I'm covering it in a nice finish, and let this dry for, I believe, 24 hours. I think it's 24 to 48 hours. Follow the instructions on the can, and that's the best way to get the best out of these paints, is always follow the instructions. All right, so once everything is dry and your paint is looking really good, you're pretty much done, and you can hand this over to your customer or hang it up on your wall, however you want to do it. Now, this name is a delicate name. The font that the customer wanted is fairly thin, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but this thing is flexing pretty good. You really have to be careful when you choose the font on something like this, something that big. It can be thin font if it's going to be hanging on like a backboard. I can glue that to the backboard. However, this is going to be loose hanging on the wall. So the customer's going to have to be careful with this, make sure they hang it up properly, and just be careful not to flex it as they're picking up and hanging it up on there. Speaking of hanging it up, if you notice, I have the big cursive word, and then I have a smaller word with individual letters. Now, the hard part about those individual letters is keeping them straight and the spacing on those letters. So what I did was when I cut out those letters, if you notice, there was a rectangle around those letters. This is that rectangle actually cut down. The rectangle was, about this big, about that long. And what I did was I took my bandsaw and just kind of cut along the one side and just right above the bottoms of all the rest of them. What this does is allow me to hand this to the customer, and so that they can take this as a guide. They can take this piece and put a level on the wall and tape this using painter's tape or something on the wall. And then as they're hanging the individual letters, they can use this as a guide, because if you notice, these fit right back in here just like a puzzle piece on all the pieces that got cut out. So all these fit exactly where they were when you first cut it out, and they can have their spacing. When they're done, they'll pull this away, toss that away. They don't need it anymore, and they have a perfect spacing for the letters. So at the time of this recording, I do not have a picture of this up on the wall in the customer's house. However, I did lay this out on a table so that you can see what it looks like. And I think this name came out really good looking. So if I do get a picture of this before I publish this, I'll be sure to post this in this video. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so. Your subscription and your comments really support this channel and help keep it going, help keep me motivated to keep continuously publishing videos. If you haven't seen something on this channel that you want to see me showcase, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions about the process of making this sign or something else, again, let me know in the comments below. Yeah, that's all I had to share with you guys. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.